Sometimes a father's desperation can lead to the most extraordinary discoveries. When you've lost everything and your daughter is counting on you, even a piece of floating junk starts to look like hope. Noah Langley was down to his last $100 when he spotted the rusted structure bobbing in Meera Lake. The former satellite technician figured he could claim it as salvage and turn it into a home. What he found inside changed everything. The bunker wasn't abandoned. It was filled with technology from the future, files dated 20 years ahead, and secrets worth $200 million. But someone was already watching the lake, waiting for him to find it. How do you protect a discovery that shouldn't exist when powerful people will kill to keep it buried? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The eviction notice had been taped to Noah Langley's apartment door for 3 days now. Its stark white paper, a daily reminder of how far he'd fallen. 47 years old, and he was staring down homelessness with his 17-year-old daughter. Depending on him. The irony wasn't lost on him. A man who once calibrated satellite arrays for NASA was now unable to calibrate his own life. Noah sat at their small kitchen table, surrounded by unpaid bills and job rejection letters, watching Meera do homework on her laptop. She'd inherited her mother's focused intensity, the way Sarah used to furrow her brow when working through complex code. Even now, 10 years after losing his wife, Noah could see Sarah in every gesture their daughter made. "Dad, you're staring." "Again," Meera said without looking up from her screen. Her voice carried that careful neutrality teenagers perfected when they were worried but didn't want to show it. "Just thinking about your mother." Noah folded the eviction notice and slipped it into his jacket pocket. No need for Meera to see it again. She'd already caught him reading it twice. She would have figured this out by now, wouldn't she? Meera's fingers stopped moving across the keyboard. "The money stuff, I mean." Noah's chest tightened. Sarah had always been the practical one, the problem solver. She'd worked for some tech company doing programming, quantum something or other, way over his head, and she'd made good money until she'd started talking about ethical concerns with her work. Then she'd disappeared during what the police called a boating accident on Meera Lake, though they never found her body. "Your mother was brilliant with numbers," Noah said, "but she wasn't magic. Sometimes life just hits you with more than you can handle." The apartment felt smaller every day. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room that doubled as Noah's workspace when he could find freelance repair jobs. The rent was $800 a month, which had seemed manageable when he'd still had his position at the satellite facility. That was before the government contracts dried up and they'd laid off half the technical staff. Noah's savings had lasted 6 months. His unemployment benefits stretched it to 8. Now, 3 months later, he was facing the mathematics of desperation. $78 in his checking account, $1,100 owed in back rent, and a 17-year-old daughter who deserved better than watching her father fail. "I've been thinking," Meera said, closing her laptop. "I could get a job after school. Jenny's sister works at the mall and she says—" "No!" The word came out harsher than Noah intended. "Your job is school. That's not negotiable." "But Dad—" "I said no, Meera. I'm not having my daughter work to keep a roof over our heads. That's my responsibility." The silence that followed was heavy with all the things they both understood but couldn't say. Meera was smart enough to know their situation was desperate. Noah was proud enough to keep pretending he had it under control. His phone buzzed with a text message, another job interview rejection. This time for a position that paid half what he'd made as a satellite technician. Noah deleted the message without reading it fully. He'd already memorized the polite language companies used to say overqualified, which was corporate speak for too old and too experienced for what we want to pay. After Meera went to bed, Noah found himself standing by their single window, looking out at the distant shimmer of Meera Lake. The lake had taken Sarah from him. But lately he'd been drawn to it, maybe because it was the last place she'd been. seen alive. Maybe because it represented the kind of mystery he used to be good at solving, back when he had the luxury of intellectual curiosity instead of rent payments. The local salvage laws were simple enough. Anything abandoned in the lake for more than 90 days could be claimed by whoever pulled it out, provided they filed the proper paperwork with the county. It was an old law, left over from the logging days when equipment regularly ended up in the water. Most people didn't know about it, and fewer still bothered with the bureaucracy. Noah had been researching it for weeks, though he hadn't admitted to himself why. There were always rumors about things in the lake, old equipment, boats that had sunk and been forgotten. Most of it was worthless, but even scrap metal had value if you knew where to sell it. He'd driven out to Meera Lake twice in the past month, ostensibly to visit the small memorial plaque the town had installed for Sarah and the 3 other people who died in various accidents over the years. But really, he'd been scanning the shoreline, looking for anything that might help solve his immediate problem of keeping his daughter housed and fed. Meera Lake wasn't large, maybe 2 miles across at its widest point, but it was deep, fed by underground springs that kept it clear and cold year-round. The lake sat in a natural depression surrounded by pine forests and granite outcroppings, accessible by a single winding road that most tourists never bothered to explore. On his second visit, Noah had noticed something different about the water near the eastern shore. There was a dark shape beneath the surface, maybe 50 yards from land. At first he'd assumed it was a submerged log or rock formation, but when he'd borrowed binoculars from his neighbor and returned for a closer look, he'd realized it was too regular, too geometric to be natural. The shape was roughly rectangular, perhaps 30 feet long and 15 feet wide. It sat in maybe 12 feet of water, just deep enough to be hidden from casual observers, but shallow enough for someone with the right equipment to investigate. Noah had spent his career working with precision instruments, calibrating equipment that had to function flawlessly in the vacuum of space. He understood systems, redundancy, and the kind of engineering that went into making things that couldn't fail. Whatever was sitting on the lake bottom had been built by someone who understood those same principles. 3 days later, he'd filed salvage papers with the county clerk. The paperwork cost $35 he couldn't afford, but it established his legal claim to whatever was down there. The county clerk, a bored-looking woman in her 50s, had barely glanced at his filing. "You know most of the stuff, people. Pull out of that lake isn't worth the gas money to haul it away," she'd warned. Noah had smiled politely and paid the fee. He'd been calculating risk assessments his entire career. This was just another equation. $35 invested against the possibility of finding something valuable enough to buy him time to find real work. He'd rented diving equipment from a shop 2 towns over, paying with money that should have gone toward groceries. The owner, a grizzled man who looked like he'd been diving since before Noah was born, had asked if he wanted a dive partner. "Meera Lake's got some weird currents," he'd warned. "People go down alone, sometimes they don't come back up." But Noah couldn't afford a partner, and time was running out. The eviction notice gave him 2 weeks. He had to try. Standing by the window now, watching moonlight shimmer across the lake's surface, Noah felt the familiar weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Meera was depending on him. She'd already lost her mother. She couldn't lose her home, too, couldn't watch her father fail at the most basic job a parent had. Tomorrow, he'd drive out to Meera Lake with the diving gear. He'd investigate the mysterious shape he'd spotted beneath the water, and maybe if he was lucky, he'd find something that could change their situation. He didn't expect treasure. He wasn't looking for magic solutions. He just needed something valuable enough to buy them a few more months, long enough for him to find steady work and get back on his feet. As he finally turned away from the window and headed toward the couch that served as his bed, Noah allowed himself one small hope, that whatever he found in Meera Lake would be worth the risk he was about to take. For Meera's sake, if not his own, He had to believe that sometimes desperation could lead to salvation. The eviction notice crinkled in his pocket as he settled onto the couch. In 14 days, they'd be out on the street, unless he found a miracle. Tomorrow, he was going looking for one at the bottom of a lake. The lake that had taken his wife was about to become either his salvation or his final defeat. Noah closed his eyes and tried not to think about which outcome was more likely. The water was colder than Noah had expected, even through the wetsuit. He'd arrived at Meera Lake before dawn, wanting to avoid any curious onlookers who might complicate his salvage operation. The rental diving gear felt foreign after 15 years, but muscle memory kicked in as he adjusted his mask and checked his air supply one final time. 50 yards from shore, the dark shape waited beneath 12 feet of crystal-clear water. Up close, it was unmistakably artificial. A rectangular structure with smooth, metallic surfaces that showed none of the corrosion Noah would have expected from something that had been underwater for years. If anything, it looked almost pristine. Noah descended slowly, equalizing pressure in his ears as he approached the object. What he'd assumed was a piece of industrial equipment or a sunken boat revealed itself to be something far more sophisticated. The structure appeared to be some kind of vessel or container, roughly the size of a small house trailer with what looked like an access hatch on its upper surface. As he swam closer, details became clearer. The hull wasn't made of ordinary steel or aluminum. It had a peculiar sheen to it, almost like brushed titanium, and the seams were so precise they seemed welded by machine rather than human hands. There were no visible windows, but Noah could make out what appeared to be sensor arrays and communication equipment mounted along the sides. The access hatch was secured with what looked like a biometric scanner, a piece of technology that definitely shouldn't exist on an abandoned piece of equipment sitting at the bottom of a lake. Noah ran his gloved fingers over the scanner's surface, noting the sophisticated design and the complete absence of algae or water damage. He surfaced to catch his breath and gather his thoughts. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't some piece of forgotten industrial equipment. The technology level was far beyond anything he'd seen in his years working with satellite systems, and the pristine condition suggested it hadn't been underwater for very long. Noah dove again, this time bringing a waterproof flashlight to examine the structure more carefully. The beam revealed additional details that made his pulse quicken. Along one side, barely visible unless you knew where to look, was a small corporate logo, Quantum Dynamics, the same company where his wife had worked before her disappearance. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't a random discovery. It was connected to Sarah somehow. But how had it gotten here, and why was it in such perfect condition? Noah spent another 20 minutes exploring the exterior, documenting everything with an underwater camera he'd borrowed from the dive shop. The structure appeared to be completely sealed, with no obvious way to gain entry other than the biometric scanner. But as he prepared to surface and plan his next move, something unexpected happened. The scanner flickered to life. A soft blue light emanated from beneath the water, clearly visible even in the dim morning light filtering down from the surface. Noah swam closer, his heart hammering against his ribs. The display showed what appeared to be a palm print reader, along with text that made his blood run cold. Authorized personnel only. Quantum Dynamics, Temporal Research Division. Temporal Research. Sarah had never mentioned anything about time-related projects. But then again, she'd been increasingly secretive about her work in the months before her disappearance. Noah placed his palm against the scanner, not really expecting anything to happen. But the device responded immediately, scanning his handprint and then displaying a message that changed everything. Secondary authorization detected. Noah Langley, spouse of primary operator. Emergency access granted. The hatch unlocked with a soft click that was somehow audible even underwater. Noah surfaced quickly, his mind reeling. The scanner had recognized him, identified him by name, and granted him access based on his relationship to Sarah, which meant this thing had been programmed to expect him, programmed with the knowledge that he might one day find it. He treaded water for several minutes, trying to process the implications. Whatever this structure was, Sarah had ensured he would be able to access it. But why? And what would he find inside? The logical part of his mind urged caution. He should surface, contact the authorities, maybe hire a lawyer before proceeding. But the desperate father in him, the man facing eviction in 13 days, whispered that this might be the answer to all his problems. Noah took a deep breath and dove back down to the hatch. The interior was even more shocking than the exterior. As soon as Noah pulled himself through the airlock, which somehow contained breathable air despite being underwater, soft lighting activated automatically. The space beyond was dry, climate-controlled, and filled with technology that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. He removed his diving gear and stood dripping on a floor made of some kind of advanced composite material. The main compartment was larger than it had appeared from outside, with curved walls lined with banks of sophisticated computer equipment. Screens flickered to life as his presence was detected, displaying data streams and system diagnostics in multiple languages, but it was the voice that made him freeze in place. "Containment breach logged," said a synthesized female voice, speaking from hidden speakers throughout the compartment, awaiting instructions from primary operator. Noah's hands trembled as he looked around the space. This wasn't just some abandoned equipment. It was an active system, powered and functional, waiting for someone to operate it. And according to the biometric scanner, that someone was him. Along one wall, he spotted a series of sealed storage compartments, each marked with biometric locks similar to the entry hatch. One of them bore a label that made his chest tighten. S. Langley, Personal Effects, Sarah's compartment. Noah approached it slowly, his mind struggling to accept what he was seeing. The scanner recognized his palm print immediately, and the compartment opened with a soft hiss. Inside, he found items that had belonged to his wife. Her favorite coffee mug, a photo of him and Meera, and a sealed envelope with his name written in Sarah's distinctive handwriting. With shaking fingers, he opened the envelope and read the letter inside. "Noah, if you're reading this, then the containment protocols have been activated and I'm probably not coming home. I know you have questions, and I wish I could be there to answer them. What I can tell you is this. The work we were doing at Quantum Dynamics was more dangerous than I realized. We weren't just researching advanced computing, we were manipulating time itself. This facility is a fail-safe, designed to preserve critical research and provide emergency shelter if our experiments went wrong. The biometric locks are programmed to recognize you and Meera as secondary operators. Everything inside belongs to you now. Use it to protect our daughter and give her the future she deserves. The quantum drives contain patents and research data, worth more than you can imagine, but be careful who you trust. Quantum Dynamics will want this technology back, and they won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who stands in their way. I love you both. Take care of each other. Sarah. Noah read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. Sarah hadn't died in a boating accident. She'd been working on time manipulation technology, and something had gone wrong. This underwater facility was her insurance policy, her way of making sure he and Meera would be provided for if she didn't survive her work. He looked around the compartment with new understanding. The advanced technology, the perfect preservation, the fact that the scanner had been programmed to recognize him, it all made sense now. Sarah had built this place as a shelter and a legacy, knowing that her work might cost her life. The synthesized voice spoke again. "Primary operator status update required. Please specify mission parameters." Noah stared at the banks of sophisticated equipment, realizing that he was now the operator of technology he didn't understand, in possession of research that could change the world or get him killed. In his hands, he held patents and data, worth millions of dollars, hidden in a facility that officially didn't exist. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about eviction notices or job applications. He was thinking about the choice Sarah had left him: use this technology to secure Meera's future, or walk away and let quantum dynamics reclaim their secret. As he sealed Sarah's letter back in its envelope, Noah realized that his desperate search for salvage had led him to something far more valuable and dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The floating bunker wasn't just a solution to his financial problems, it was the key to understanding what had really happened to his wife, and possibly the most important discovery of his lifetime. The question now was whether he was brave enough or desperate enough to claim it. Noah spent 3 hours inside the underwater facility, methodically exploring its compartments and trying to understand the technology Sarah had left behind. The more he discovered, the more questions arose. This wasn't just a research station. It was a fully functional living space, complete with sleeping quarters, food storage, and life support systems that seemed designed to operate independently for months. In the main computer terminal, he found files labeled with dates that made no sense. According to the system logs, some of the research data had been created in 2043, nearly 20 years in the future. Either the computer's clock was catastrophically wrong, or Sarah's work had involved something far more complex than advanced. Programming. The quantum drives she'd mentioned in her letter were housed in a specially shielded compartment that required his biometric signature to access. Inside, Noah found data storage devices unlike anything he'd seen in his technical career. They were crystalline structures that seemed to pulse with their own internal light, containing what the system identified as compressed temporal research archives. But it was Sarah's personal belongings that affected him most deeply. Her ID badge from Quantum Dynamics, worn at the edges from daily use, bore a photo that showed her serious expression, the same look she'd worn whenever she was wrestling with a difficult ethical decision. On the back of the badge, in her small handwriting, she'd written, "For Noah and Meera, the future doesn't have to repeat the past." Noah recognized other items from their life together: the small ceramic owl she'd kept on her desk, a book of poetry he'd given her for their anniversary, and a thumb drive labeled Personal Memories. When he plugged the drive into the facility's computer system, he found hundreds of photos and videos, moments from their marriage and Meera's childhood that Sarah had compiled as if she'd known she might not be around to share them in person. One video message was addressed specifically to him. Sarah's face appeared on the main screen, and Noah felt his throat constrict. She looked tired, older than he remembered, with worry lines around her eyes that hadn't been there in her final months. "At home, Noah," her recorded voice said, "if you're watching this, then you've found the facility and you know that I haven't come home. I want you to understand that everything I did was to protect you and Meera. The work at Quantum Dynamics started as pure research. We thought we were just exploring theoretical possibilities. But the applications became too dangerous to ignore. The video showed Sarah in what appeared to be a laboratory, surrounded by equipment that looked nothing like traditional computers. We discovered how to manipulate quantum temporal fields, essentially how to send information backwards and forwards through time. The potential benefits were incredible: preventing disasters, curing diseases before they spread, solving problems before they became critical. But the potential for abuse was even greater. Noah paused the video, trying to process what he was hearing. Time travel. His wife had been working on actual time travel, and somehow this underwater facility was connected to that research. He resumed the video. Sarah's expression had grown more serious. The corporate leadership wanted to weaponize the technology, sell it to the highest bidder without considering the consequences. When I tried to raise ethical concerns, I discovered that several researchers who'd opposed the project had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. I realized I was probably next. The camera angle shifted, showing more of the laboratory. Noah could see other researchers in the background, working with equipment that seemed to bend light around itself. I built this facility as a failsafe, using technology I smuggled out of the main lab. The quantum drives contain not just our research data, but patents for technologies that won't be invented for decades. If something happened to me, I wanted to ensure you and Meera would have the resources to build a better future. Sarah moved closer to the camera, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But Noah, you need to be careful. Quantum dynamics has resources and connections that go far beyond what a normal corporation should have. They've been monitoring temporal fluctuations, looking for signs that their technology has been deployed. The moment you activate any of the advanced systems in this facility, they'll know where to find you. The video ended with Sarah looking directly into the camera. I love you both more than you can know. Use what I've left you, but don't trust anyone until you understand exactly what you're dealing with. And remember, the future isn't fixed. We all have the power to change it. Noah stared at the blank screen, his mind reeling. His wife hadn't just been a programmer. She'd been part of a time travel research program, and she died trying to prevent that technology from being misused. Now he was sitting in an underwater laboratory that contained research worth potentially billions of dollars, and according to Sarah, simply using it would alert the people who'd killed her. He spent the next hour examining the facility's defensive systems. Sarah had been thorough in her preparations. The structure was designed to be completely invisible to most forms of detection, hidden beneath the lake's surface and shielded from electromagnetic surveillance. The life support systems could operate for up to 6 months without outside power, and the quantum drives were protected by encryption that would take conventional computers centuries to break. But the most unsettling discovery was a monitoring system that showed real-time surveillance of the lake's perimeter. According to the displays, there had been unusual activity in the area over the past several days. Vehicles that didn't belong to local residents, boats that appeared at odd hours, and what appeared to be aerial reconnaissance flights that had no official explanation. Someone was already watching Mirror Lake, waiting for something to happen. Noah's hands trembled as he accessed the facility's external sensors. The technology was unlike anything in his experience, providing detailed analysis of electromagnetic signatures, chemical composition of the surrounding water, and even quantum field fluctuations that he didn't understand, but that the system flagged as anomalous. According to the readings, there were at least 3 different monitoring stations positioned around the lake, each using sophisticated equipment to scan for signs of the facility's activation. The moment he'd opened the main hatch, he'd triggered alerts that were probably already being analyzed by people who knew exactly what they were looking for. Noah's phone had no signal inside the facility, whether by design or due to the underwater location. He couldn't tell. But he knew that Meera would be expecting him home before dinner, and his absence for an entire day would raise questions he wasn't prepared to answer. He carefully sealed the quantum drives back in their shielded compartment and gathered Sarah's personal belongings. The ID badge went into his pocket, along with the thumb drive, containing her personal messages. Everything else he left in place, understanding instinctively that removing too much at once would be dangerous. Before leaving, he spent several minutes studying the facility's security protocols. Sarah had designed multiple layers of protection, including the ability to completely seal the structure and activate stealth modes that would make it virtually undetectable. But she'd also included emergency procedures for rapid evacuation, suggesting that she'd anticipated the possibility of the facility being discovered by hostile forces. As Noah prepared to exit through the airlock, the synthetic voice spoke once more. Primary operator departure logged. Facility entering standby mode. Next scheduled activation in 24 hours unless countermanded. The implication was clear. The system expected him to return tomorrow, and if he didn't, it would assume something had gone wrong and implement additional security measures. Noah sealed the hatch behind him and began his ascent to the surface, his mind churning with everything he'd learned. Sarah hadn't just left him money or research data. She'd left him a weapon. The technology contained in those quantum drives could revolutionize entire industries, cure diseases, prevent disasters. But it could also be used to manipulate history, eliminate enemies, or create weapons that would make nuclear bombs look like firecrackers. As he broke the surface of Meera Lake and swam toward shore, Noah realized that his life had changed irrevocably in the space of a single day. He was no longer just an unemployed satellite technician facing eviction. He was the guardian of the most dangerous technology ever developed, and the only thing standing between that technology and the people who'd killed his wife to obtain. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. Sarah had trusted him with this secret, but she'd also burdened him with an impossible choice: use the technology to secure his daughter's future, knowing that doing so would put them both in mortal danger, or keep it hidden and watch Meera grow up in poverty while possessing the means to change the world. As he loaded his diving gear into his car and prepared to drive home, Noah caught sight of a black sedan parked on the far side of the lake. It hadn't been there when he'd arrived that morning, and something about its positioning suggested professional surveillance rather than casual sightseeing. They were watching him already. Noah started his engine and drove away from Meera Lake, Sarah's ID badge burning like a coal in his pocket. For the first time in 10 years, he felt connected to his wife again, not through grief or memory, but through shared purpose. She'd prepared for this moment, anticipated his discovery of the facility, and trusted him to carry on her work. The question now was whether he was strong enough to handle what she'd left behind, and smart enough to stay alive long enough to use it. Noah arrived home 3 hours later than expected, to find Meera pacing in their small living room, her phone clutched in her hand. The relief on her face when he walked through the door quickly shifted to suspicion as she took in his appearance. His hair still damp from the lake, his clothes carrying the lingering smell of wetsuit rubber. "Where were you?" she demanded. "You didn't answer your phone, and Mrs. Chen said she saw you leaving before dawn with a bunch of equipment in your car." Noah set his keys on the kitchen table, buying time while he figured out how much to tell her. The encrypted drive containing Sarah's personal messages felt heavy in his jacket pocket, along with the ID badge that proved everything he'd discovered was real. "I was following up on a salvage opportunity at Meera Lake," he said, which was technically true. "Something I spotted a few weeks ago that might be worth investigating." Meera's expression softened slightly, but the wariness remained. "Did you find anything?" Noah hesitated. The smart thing would be to tell her nothing, to protect her from the dangers that came with knowing about the facility. But Meera was 17, not 7, and she'd inherited her mother's intelligence along with her suspicious nature. She would figure out that something significant had happened, and keeping her in the dark might put her in more danger than the truth. "I found something that belonged to your mother," he said finally. "Something that changes what we thought we knew about her work." The color drained from Meera's face. "What do you mean?" Noah pulled out Sarah's ID badge and placed it on the table between them. Meera picked it up with trembling fingers, studying the photo and the corporate logo she'd never seen before. "Quantum dynamics," she read aloud. "Mom never mentioned working for a company with that name. There's a lot your mother never mentioned about her work," Noah said gently. "She was protecting us by keeping it secret, but I think it's time you knew the truth about what happened to her." Over the next hour, Noah told Meera everything: the underwater facility, Sarah's letter, the advanced technology, and the warnings. About quantum dynamics, he watched his daughter's expressions shift from disbelief to amazement to fear as she processed the implications of what he'd discovered. "So Mom didn't die in a boating accident," Meera said when he'd finished. "She was Murdered because she tried to stop her company from weaponizing time travel technology. That's what I believe, yes. Meera was quiet for a long moment, turning her mother's ID badge over in her hands. And now you have access to all of her research, technology that could make us rich enough to never worry about money again. It's not that simple, Noah said. According to your mother's warnings, the moment I start using any of the advanced systems, quantum dynamics will know where to find us. We'd have the money to solve our immediate problems, but we'd also have a target on our backs. We already have a target on our backs, Meera pointed out. You said there were surveillance teams around the lake. They probably already know you found the facility. Noah nodded grimly. She was right, of course. His discovery of the facility had probably triggered monitoring systems he wasn't even aware of. The question now wasn't whether quantum dynamics would find them, but how much time they had before the confrontation began. There's something else, he said, pulling out the encrypted drive containing Sarah's personal files. Your mother left messages for both of us. Video files, photos, things she wanted us to have if she didn't come home. Meera's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she reached for the drive. Can we watch them? Not here, Noah said. The encryption requires the facility's computer system to decode. We'd have to go back to the lake. Then let's go back. Noah shook his head. It's too dangerous right now. There were people watching the lake when I left. We need to be smart about this, plan our approach carefully. They spent the evening researching quantum dynamics online, using the apartment's limited internet connection, to search for any information about the company and its operations. What they found was unsettling. Quantum Dynamics existed as a legitimate corporation with offices in major cities around the world, but their actual business activities were vaguely described as advanced research and development. The company's executive team included former government officials, military contractors, and scientists who'd previously worked for organizations with names like Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency and Strategic Defense Initiative. Their public filings showed massive revenues, but very few concrete products, suggesting that most of their income came from classified government contracts. Look at this, Meera said, pointing to an article from a technology blog. 3 researchers from Quantum Dynamics have died in the past 2 years, all from accidents that happened just after they'd submitted resignations or raised concerns about company policies. Noah leaned over her shoulder to read the details. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, found dead in her car after an apparent brake failure. Dr. Michael Torres, killed in a house fire that investigators couldn't explain. Dr. Rebecca Chen, who drowned during a solo sailing trip despite being an experienced swimmer and sailor. Your mother wasn't the first person to discover something dangerous about their research, Noah said grimly. She was just smart enough to prepare for the consequences. They continued searching until late in the evening, building a picture of Quantum Dynamics as a company that operated with minimal oversight and maximum secrecy. The more they learned, the clearer it became that Sarah's warnings had been justified. They were dealing with an organization that eliminated threats without hesitation. Dad, Meera said as they prepared for bed, what are we going to do? We can't keep living like this, knowing what we know but too afraid to act on it. Noah looked around their small apartment, at the eviction notice still stuck to their refrigerator, at the bills piled on the kitchen table. In 12 days, they'd be homeless. But now he had access to technology and research data worth potentially hundreds of millions of dollars, along with the knowledge that using it would paint a target on both their backs. I don't know yet, he admitted, but your mother was smart enough to plan for this situation. Maybe she left us instructions we haven't found yet. That night, Noah lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, his mind churning through possibilities and dangers. The encrypted drive in his jacket contained Sarah's final messages to them, but accessing those messages required returning to the facility. And returning to the facility meant risking exposure to whatever surveillance teams were monitoring the lake, but they couldn't stay paralyzed by fear forever. The eviction deadline was approaching, and their financial situation wouldn't improve by avoiding the resources Sarah had left them. Somehow, he had to find a way to access the facility's technology without alerting quantum dynamics to their activities. Around 3 in the morning, an idea began to form. The facility had been designed with stealth capabilities that Sarah had mentioned, but Noah hadn't fully explored. If he could figure out how to activate those systems, he might be able to access the quantum drives without triggering the surveillance networks that were watching for signs of activity. It would require careful planning and probably multiple trips to the facility, each one carrying the risk of discovery. But the alternative was accepting defeat, watching Meera grow up in poverty while possessing the means to give her a better future. Noah finally fell asleep, thinking about Sarah's message on the back of her ID badge. The future doesn't have to repeat the past. She'd left them the tools to change their situation, but only if they were brave enough to use them. The next morning brought a development that forced their hand. Noah woke to find an unmarked envelope that had been slipped under their apartment door during the night. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message typed in plain text. Mr. Langley, we know you visited Meera Lake yesterday. We know what you found there. Your wife's research belongs to quantum dynamics, and we intend to reclaim it. You have 48 hours to return all materials and provide access to the facility. Failure to comply will result in consequences for you and your daughter. Instructions will follow. The message was unsigned, but the implication was clear. Quantum Dynamics had been monitoring his activities, knew about his discovery of the facility, and were prepared to threaten Meera to force his cooperation. Noah showed the letter to Meera when she woke up. Her face went pale as she read it, but her voice was steady when she spoke. They're trying to scare us into giving up, she said. But Mom built that facility for us, didn't she? She wanted us to have that technology, to use it to build a better life. We can't just hand it over to the people who killed her. Noah felt a surge of pride at his daughter's courage. At 17, she was already braver than he'd been at twice her age. You're right, he said, but we need to be smart about this. They've given us 48 hours, which means they're probably still trying to figure out exactly what we know and how much of a threat we represent. We need to use that time to access your mother's messages and understand what options she left us. Meera nodded. When do we go back to the lake? Tonight, Noah said. After dark, when there's less chance of being observed, we'll access the facility. One more time, get your mother's messages and figure out our next move. As they spent the day preparing for their return to Meera Lake, Noah couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping across a line from which there would be no return. Once they fully engaged with Sarah's technology, they would become players in a game much larger and more dangerous than anything he'd ever imagined. But the alternative, surrendering to quantum dynamics and watching them profit from Sarah's murder, was unacceptable. His wife had died trying to prevent this technology from being weaponized. The least he could do was honor her sacrifice by ensuring her final gift to their family wasn't handed over to her killers. The encrypted drive in his pocket seemed to pulse with possibility and danger in equal measure. Tonight, they would discover what final messages Sarah had left for them, and what tools she'd provided to fight the battle she hadn't survived. The future, as Sarah had written, didn't have to repeat the past, but changing it would require more courage than Noah had ever needed before. They returned to Meera Lake under cover of darkness, parking Noah's car in a different location and approaching the shore through the pine forest that surrounded the water. The night air was cold enough that their breath formed visible clouds, and Noah found himself grateful for the darkness that concealed their movements from any watchers who might be positioned around the lake. But as they prepared the diving equipment, Noah's flashlight caught a glint of metal among the trees. He motioned for Meera to stay quiet and crept closer to investigate. What he found made his blood run cold. A small surveillance drone, no larger than a hummingbird, perched on a branch about 20 feet from where they'd set up their gear. The device was unlike anything Noah had seen in consumer electronics. Its construction was too sophisticated for civilian use, with sensors that seemed designed for low-light observation and what appeared to be a quantum communication array that would allow real-time data transmission without using conventional radio frequencies. "We're being watched," he whispered to Meera as he returned to where she waited by the water's edge. "Professional surveillance, not local law enforcement." Meera's eyes widened, but her voice remained steady. "Can we disable it?" "Probably, but that would alert them that we know about the surveillance. Better to assume there are more of them and work around their limitations." Noah studied the drone's positioning, trying to determine its field of view and detection capabilities. The device appeared to be focused on the shoreline where someone would normally enter the water, but its sensors might not be able to track underwater movement or detect activity beneath the lake's surface. "Change of plans," he told Meera. "I'm going down alone, and I'm entering the water from the far side of that rock outcropping. You stay here and keep watch. If you see any signs of activity, cars, boats, people with flashlights, you signal me with 3 quick flashes of your light. Dad, I want to come with you. Those are Mum's messages down there, and I have a right to hear them." Noah understood her frustration, but the risks were escalating beyond what he was comfortable with. The surveillance drone proved that quantum dynamics was taking their ultimatum seriously, and that meant additional security measures were probably already in place. "I'll bring the encrypted drive up with me," he promised. "We can access your mother's messages from the facility's systems, but we don't have to view them down there. The important thing is getting the information without triggering any additional alarms." Meera reluctantly agreed, and Noah made his way around the rocky outcropping that formed the eastern shore of Meera Lake. The approach was more difficult. From this angle, requiring him to swim nearly 100 yards underwater to reach the facility, but it kept him out of the surveillance drone's direct line of sight. The facility's systems recognized his biometric signature immediately, and the synthetic voice welcomed him back with an update that made his pulse quicken. "External monitoring activity detected. Stealth protocols are recommended for all operations." Noah activated the facility's stealth mode, watching as various systems powered down to minimal levels, and the external sensors shifted to passive monitoring only. According to the displays, the stealth protocols would make the facility virtually undetectable to most forms of electronic surveillance, but they also limited his access to some of the more advanced systems. He spent the first hour accessing Sarah's encrypted files and copying them to multiple storage devices. The quantum drives contained not just research data and patents, but detailed documentation of quantum dynamics operations, financial records showing payments to government officials, and communications that proved the company had been systematically eliminating researchers who opposed their projects. One file contained a complete organizational chart of quantum dynamics leadership, along with background information that Sarah had compiled on each executive. At the top of the hierarchy was Dr. Marcus Chen, a former Defense Department official who had founded the company using classified government research as seed technology. Below him were department heads responsible for weapons development, temporal, manipulation research, and what the chart ominously labeled as threat elimination. But the most disturbing discovery was a file labeled Operation Timeline, a detailed plan for using temporal manipulation technology to alter historical events in ways that would benefit quantum dynamics government and corporate allies. The plan included preventing certain disasters that had cost the company money, eliminating competitors before they could develop rival technologies, and even altering the outcomes of elections and military conflicts. Noah realized he wasn't just looking at corporate malfeasance. He was looking at a conspiracy to rewrite history itself. Sarah's personal messages were stored in a separate, more heavily encrypted section of the quantum drives. As Noah accessed them, he felt the familiar ache of loss mixed with anticipation. These were her final words to him and Meera, recorded during the last weeks of her life, when she'd known that her opposition to quantum dynamics was likely to cost her everything. The first message was addressed to both of them, Noah and Meera. If you're watching this, then you've found the facility and you know the truth about my work. I want you to understand that everything I did was motivated by love for you both and fear of what this technology could become in the wrong hands. The research we developed at Quantum Dynamics represents the most powerful tool ever created by human beings. The ability to manipulate time, to send information and even objects backwards and forwards through temporal fields, could solve every problem facing humanity. We could prevent wars, cure diseases, stop natural disasters, eliminate poverty and suffering. But I've seen what the company's leadership wants to do with this power, and it terrifies me. They don't want to solve humanity's problems. They want to control humanity's destiny. They want to reshape history to benefit themselves and their allies, turning the entire timeline into their personal domain. I built this facility as a safeguard, a way to preserve the research while keeping it out of their hands. But I also built it as a weapon. If necessary, the quantum systems here can be used to prevent quantum dynamics from implementing their plans. The choice of how to use this technology is now yours. The message continued with technical details about the facility's capabilities, but Noah's attention was caught by movement on the external sensors. The stealth protocols were working. The facility remained undetected, but something was happening on the surface that made his chest tighten with worry. Multiple vehicles had arrived at different points around Meera Lake, their occupants deploying what appeared to be sophisticated scanning equipment. Noah watched the sensor displays with growing alarm as teams of operatives established positions that would allow them to monitor every approach to the water. They weren't just watching anymore. They were preparing to act. Noah quickly gathered the storage devices containing Sarah's files and prepared to leave the facility. But as he approached the airlock, the external sensors detected something that made his blood freeze. Meera's emergency signal, 3 quick flashes of light from the shore where he'd left her. Someone had found his daughter. Noah's hands flew across the facility's control systems, bringing up every external sensor and camera feed available. What he saw on the displays made his worst fears seem optimistic. At least a dozen operatives in tactical gear had surrounded Meera Lake, moving with the precision of military professionals. They weren't just corporate security. These were people trained for combat operations, and they had Meera. Through the facility's advanced optics, Noah could see his daughter being escorted by 2 armed men toward a black command vehicle that had been positioned near the main access road. She appeared unharmed, but clearly terrified. Her hands zip-tied behind her back as they guided her into the vehicle's rear compartment. Noah's training as a satellite technician had taught him to remain calm under pressure, to analyze problems methodically and develop solutions based on available resources. But watching his daughter being kidnapped shattered that professional composure entirely. His hands shook as he activated the facility's communication systems, trying to establish contact with the operatives on the surface. "This is Noah Langley," he broadcast on multiple frequencies. "You have my daughter. I'm prepared to negotiate." The response came immediately, routed through the facility's quantum communication array with crystal clarity. "Mr. Langley, this is Dr. Marcus Chen, Director of Operations for Quantum Dynamics. I apologize for the dramatic circumstances, but your failure to respond to our initial contact left us with limited options." Noah recognized the name from Sarah's files, the former Defense Department official who had founded Quantum Dynamics and turned it into a weapons development company disguised as a research corporation. "Let my daughter go," Noah said. "This is between you and me." "I'm afraid that's not entirely accurate," Chen replied. "According to our biometric analysis of the facility's access logs, your daughter is also listed as a secondary operator. That makes her just as valuable to us as you are, and just as dangerous if left unsupervised. The revelation hit Noah like a physical blow. Sarah had programmed the facility to recognize Meera as an operator, which meant his daughter had access to the same quantum technology and research data that quantum dynamics was trying to reclaim. She wasn't just a hostage, she was a target. "What do you want?" Noah asked. "Complete access to the facility and all research materials your wife stole from us," Chen said. "In exchange, you and your daughter will be relocated to comfortable accommodations where you can live quietly without interfering in our operations." Noah understood the euphemism. Comfortable accommodations meant prison, and living quietly meant permanent silence. Quantum dynamics had no intention of letting them survive once they'd recovered Sarah's research. "I need time to consider your offer," Noah said, buying time while he explored the facility's defensive capabilities. "You have 30 minutes, Chen replied. "If you haven't surrendered by then, we'll be forced to take more direct action to secure the facility." The communication channel went silent, leaving Noah alone with the weight of an impossible decision. Surrendering meant certain death for both him and Meera, but refusing to surrender meant watching his daughter die while he remained trapped underwater, unless he could find another option. Noah accessed the facility's technical documentation, searching for any capabilities that Sarah might have built into the system for exactly this type of situation. What he found was both terrifying and hopeful. The facility wasn't just a research station and shelter, it was a fully functional quantum manipulation platform. According to the technical specifications, the facility could generate localized, temporal fields strong enough to affect objects within a several-mile radius. The technology could be used for communication across time, transportation of objects through temporal rifts, or, in emergency situations, as a weapon that could disrupt the molecular cohesion of anything within its targeting range. Sarah had built the facility not just to preserve her research, but to defend it. But using the quantum manipulation systems would require precise calculations and a thorough understanding of temporal physics that Noah didn't possess. The technical manuals were thousands of pages long, written in scientific language that went far beyond his expertise with satellite systems. Noah was running out of time when he discovered something that changed everything: a quantum communicator that operated on principles he didn't understand, but with an interface that was surprisingly intuitive. The device was labeled Emergency Temporal Contact Protocol, and according to its documentation, it could establish communication across quantum fields with any compatible receiver. The system showed one active connection already established. When Noah activated the communicator, a familiar voice filled the facility's speakers, but it wasn't coming from the surface. "Noah?" It was Sarah's voice, but not a recording. The audio had the real-time quality of a live conversation. "Sarah?" Noah's voice cracked with disbelief and hope. "How is this possible? I'm not dead, Noah, not exactly. The temporal manipulation experiment that quantum dynamics claimed killed me, actually displaced me in a quantum field. I exist in a kind of suspended state between timelines. I've been trapped here for 10 years, waiting for you to find the facility and activate the quantum communicator." Noah felt his legs give out beneath him. He collapsed into the facility's command chair, struggling to process what he was hearing. His wife wasn't dead. She was somehow suspended in a quantum field, conscious and aware, but unable to interact with the physical world. "The people who have Meera," Sarah continued, "they're the same ones who tried to kill me when I discovered their plans. Marcus Chen ordered my elimination, but the temporal experiment created an unexpected side effect. Instead of dying, I was caught in a quantum loop that preserved my consciousness." "Can you see what's happening up there?" Noah asked. "They have. Meera, and they're threatening to kill her if I don't surrender the facility. I can access the facility's sensors through the quantum field," Sarah confirmed. "And I can do more than just watch. The quantum manipulation systems can affect the physical world, but only if operated by someone with the proper access codes. Noah felt a spark of hope. What do you need me to do? The facility has defensive capabilities that Chen doesn't know about, Sarah explained. I built quantum disruptors into the system. They can disable electronic equipment within a specific radius without harming people, but activating them requires two-person authentication. One operator in the physical world, one in the quantum field. Walk me through it, Noah said, his technical training finally finding solid ground to stand on. Sarah guided him through a series of complex procedures, her voice calm and professional despite the desperate circumstances. The quantum disruptor system required precise targeting calculations, power level adjustments, and timing that had to be coordinated between the physical and quantum control systems. The disruptors will disable their vehicles, communications, and weapons, Sarah explained, as Noah entered the final sequence of commands. But the effect is temporary, maybe 20 minutes before their backup systems come online. You'll need to use that time to reach Meera and get both of you to safety. What about you? Noah asked. Can the facility extract you from the quantum field? Sarah's pause lasted long enough to tell him everything he needed to know. The quantum loop that's kept me conscious for 10 years is deteriorating. Using the disruptors will require so much power that it might collapse entirely. This could be the last time we talk. Noah's hands stopped moving across the control systems. There has to be another way. Noah, our daughter is up there with people who kill researchers for asking ethical questions. You have to choose between saving her life and the possibility of saving mine. That's not a choice at all. Noah closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 10 years of grief and the prospect of losing Sarah again. But she was right. Meera's life took priority over everything else, even the miraculous discovery that his wife was still alive in some form. I love you, he said simply. I love you too, Sarah replied. Both of you. Take care of our daughter and make sure the world knows what quantum dynamics really is. The evidence is all in the quantum drives. Use it to expose them. Noah activated the quantum disruptor system, watching as the facility's power levels spiked and the external sensors registered massive electromagnetic interference across the entire lake area. On the surface, every electronic device within a mile radius went dead simultaneously. Vehicles shut down, communication systems failed, and the tactical equipment that quantum dynamics had brought to secure the facility became useless metal and plastic. The quantum communicator went silent as the power surge overwhelmed the facility's systems. Sarah was gone again, this time possibly forever. But her sacrifice had given Noah the opportunity he needed to save their daughter. Noah grabbed the storage devices containing Sarah's research files and activated the facility's emergency surface protocols. Within seconds, he was being propelled toward the surface by systems designed to evacuate the facility's operator in Tassinda. Exactly this type of crisis. He emerged from Meera Lake to find chaos on the shoreline. Quantum dynamics operatives were running between disabled vehicles, trying to understand why their sophisticated equipment had suddenly stopped working. In the confusion, Noah spotted the command vehicle where they'd taken Meera, its doors standing open as the operatives inside tried to restart their communication systems. Noah had 20 minutes before their backup systems came online. It was enough time to reach his daughter, but not enough time to escape the area entirely. He needed a different plan. As he swam toward shore, Noah realized that Sarah had given him more than just a temporary advantage. She'd given him the key to ending quantum dynamics' threat permanently. The research files in his waterproof pack contained enough evidence to expose the company's operations to the world, but only if he could stay alive long enough to make that evidence public. The real battle was just beginning. Noah reached the disabled command vehicle just as the electromagnetic interference began to fade. The quantum dynamics operatives were still struggling with their equipment, giving him a narrow window to act. He found Meera in the back of the vehicle, zip-tied but unharmed, her eyes wide with relief when she saw him. "Dad!" I thought. When all their stuff stopped working, I didn't know what happened. "Your mother happened," Noah whispered as he cut her restraints with a tactical knife he'd taken from one of the confused operatives. "She's been protecting us all along." They needed to move quickly. Noah could see the tactical teams beginning to reorganize as their backup communication systems came online. Within minutes, they discovered the facility's location and realized that Noah had somehow disabled their primary equipment. But as they prepared to flee into the forest, something extraordinary happened. The air around Meera Lake began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer pavement, and a low humming sound filled the night. Noah recognized the quantum field fluctuations from the facility's technical documentation. Something was manipulating the temporal environment on a massive scale. "Noah Langley!" a voice called from behind them. They turned to see Dr. Marcus Chen approaching, flanked by two operatives whose equipment had apparently been unaffected by the electromagnetic pulse. "I think it's time we had a proper conversation." Chen was smaller than Noah had expected. A thin man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of expensive suit that suggested comfort with wealth and power. But his eyes held an intensity that made Noah instinctively step closer to Meera. "Dr. Chen," Noah said, recognizing him from Sarah's files. "You've come a long way to reclaim research that doesn't belong to you." Chen smiled, but the expression held no warmth. "Oh, but it does belong to us, Mr. Langley. Every equation, every breakthrough, every line of code your wife developed was created on company time using company resources. The fact that she disagreed with our applications doesn't change the ownership of the intellectual property." "She disagreed with you turning time travel into a weapon," Meera said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "She disagreed with you rewriting history to benefit your corporate allies." "Your daughter is well informed," Chen observed. "I assume you've accessed Sarah's files. Tell me, what did you think of Operation Timeline? Ambitious, wasn't it?" Noah felt sick. "You're talking about changing historical events that killed thousands of people, disasters, wars, terrorist attacks, all so you could profit from the altered timeline." "I'm talking about improving human civilization," Chen corrected. "Do you have any idea how many problems could be solved if we could prevent certain historical mistakes? How many lives could be saved if we eliminated the right threats before they became critical? And who decides which threats to eliminate?" Noah asked. "Who gets to choose which version of history serves the greater good?" Chen's smile widened. "People with the wisdom and resources to make those decisions responsibly. People like me." The shimmer in the air around them grew more intense, and Noah realized that Chen's unaffected equipment wasn't backup technology. It was quantum-based, operating on the same principles as Sarah's facility. Quantum dynamics had their own temporal manipulation capabilities, and they'd brought them to Meera Lake. "You see, Mr. Langley, your wife's little facility was never the only quantum research station we've built. It was simply the first one to go offline when she stole it. But we've had 10 years to improve the technology, to solve the problems that trapped her consciousness in a quantum loop." Noah's blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Sarah isn't dead and she isn't trapped," Chen revealed. "She's been working with us all along." The temporal shimmer around them intensified, and suddenly Sarah was standing next to Chen, not a quantum projection or a hologram, but physically present, solid and real. She looked exactly as she had 10 years ago, unchanged by time or death. "Hello, Noah," she said, her voice carrying a sadness that seemed to encompass decades. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." Meera gasped, stumbling backward. "Mom, but you said the quantum communicator. You said you were trapped." "I said I was displaced in a quantum field," Sarah corrected gently. "I never said I was trapped against my will." Noah felt the world tilting around him. "You've been alive this whole time, working with them. While Meera and I struggled, while we grieved for you, you've been here helping them develop weapons." I've been trying to prevent something much worse than weapons, Sarah said. Noah, what I told you about Operation Timeline was true, but it's not quantum dynamics' plan. It's someone else's plan that we've been trying to stop. Chen stepped forward, his expression growing serious. Mr. Langley, 10 years ago your wife discovered that a foreign intelligence agency had infiltrated quantum dynamics and stolen our early temporal manipulation research. They've been using that technology to alter historical events in ways that damage American interests and strengthen their own position. We've been preventing disasters that were artificially created, Sarah added, stopping terrorist attacks that were engineered by hostile actors using stolen quantum technology. The facility I built wasn't a weapon against quantum dynamics. It was a weapon against the people who've been weaponizing time itself. Noah's mind reeled as he tried to process what he was hearing. The researchers who died, the ones who raised ethical concerns, were killed by enemy agents who wanted to eliminate anyone who might expose their operations. Chen finished. We've been protecting our remaining scientists by faking their deaths and relocating them to secure facilities. Sarah's accident at Meera Lake was actually an extraction. We moved her to safety before the enemy agents could eliminate her. Meera found her voice. But the facility, the evidence against quantum dynamics, all those files showing government corruption, are part of our counterintelligence operation, Sarah explained. We've been documenting the enemy's activities, tracking their agents, building a case that will eventually allow us to expose their entire network. But we needed someone on the outside, someone they wouldn't suspect, to help us coordinate the final phase of the operation. Someone like a desperate father looking for salvage, Noah said, understanding beginning to dawn. You set this up. The facility's location, the biometric locks, the surveillance teams, all of it was designed to draw me in. Sarah nodded. We needed someone who could access the facility and retrieve the intelligence files without arousing suspicion. Someone who had legitimate reasons to be in the area and personal motivation to follow through with the mission. But why the elaborate deception? Noah demanded. Why make us think you were dead? Why put us through 10 years of grief and financial hardship? Sarah's composure finally cracked. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at her husband and daughter. Because the enemy agents have been monitoring our communications for years. If they'd known I was alive, they would have used you and Meera as leverage against me. The only way to keep you safe was to make everyone, including you, believe I was dead. Chen checked his watch. I hate to interrupt this reunion, but we have a limited window to complete the mission. The enemy agents have detected the quantum field fluctuations from tonight's activities. They'll be mobilizing their response teams within the hour. What, mission? Noah asked. The quantum drives in the facility contain more than just research data, Sarah explained. They contain a complete map of the enemy's temporal manipulation network. Every alteration they've made to the timeline, every agent they've placed in positions of influence, every plan they have for future operations. That intelligence is the key to stopping them permanently. But accessing it requires both physical and quantum authorization, Chen added. We need you to return to the facility and extract the final data files, while Sarah coordinates the quantum field manipulations. From our mobile platform, Noah looked between his wife and Chen, trying to determine whether he was being told the truth or being manipulated into serving quantum dynamics' actual agenda. The story made sense, but he'd seen too much evidence of the company's ruthless methods to accept their claims without question. If you're really the good guys, Meera said, voicing the skepticism Noah felt, then why did your people threaten to kill me? Why the elaborate chase and capture scenario? Chen's expression grew uncomfortable. Because we weren't sure whether you'd been compromised by enemy agents? The threatening letters, the surveillance, the tactical response. We had to assume the worst-case scenario until we could verify your loyalties. And have you verified them? Noah asked. Your actions tonight convinced us, Sarah said. You risked everything to save Meera, even when you thought I was just a quantum echo. That's not the behavior of someone working for foreign intelligence. Noah studied his wife's face, looking for any sign of deception. She looked older, wearier than he remembered, but her eyes held the same compassion that had drawn him to her. 20 years earlier, either she was telling the truth or she'd become a master manipulator during her 10 years of supposed death. What happens if I help you? He asked. What happens to Meera and me after this intelligence operation is complete? You get the life you should have had all along, Sarah said. The patents in the quantum drives are worth hundreds of millions of dollars in legitimate licensing fees. The government will compensate you for your assistance in national security operations, and we can finally be a family again. And if I refuse, Chen's expression hardened, then the enemy agents will find the facility within hours, extract the intelligence themselves, and eliminate anyone who might be able to expose their network. That includes you, Meera, and anyone else who knows about the quantum research. Noah realized he was facing the same impossible choice he'd confronted underwater. Trust quantum dynamics and risk being manipulated into serving their agenda, or refuse to cooperate and watch his daughter die. But now there was a third factor in the equation, the possibility that Sarah was alive and that everything she'd told him was true. The temporal shimmers around Meera Lake were growing stronger, indicating that whatever quantum field manipulation was taking place was reaching a critical phase. Time was running out to make a decision. Noah looked at Meera, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in her eyes. Then he looked at Sarah, the woman he'd loved and mourned for 10 years, who was either offering him redemption or leading him into the most sophisticated trap ever devised. All right, he said finally, but we do this together. All three of us return to the facility, and if I find any evidence that you're lying to me, the deal is off. Sarah smiled for the first time since her reappearance. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. As they prepared to return to the underwater facility, Noah couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to discover the truth about his wife's disappearance, and that the truth would be more complex and dangerous than anything he'd imagined. The descent back to the underwater facility felt different with Sarah beside him. Noah watched his wife move through the water with the same grace he remembered from their early years together, but there was something new in her manner, a precision and efficiency that spoke of extensive training in environments he couldn't imagine. She'd changed during their decade apart, become someone more capable and potentially more dangerous. Meera swam between them, her movements less practiced but determined. She'd insisted on joining them, despite Chen's suggestion that she remain on the surface, and Noah was proud of her courage, even as he worried about what they might discover in the facility's deepest archives. The quantum field fluctuations around Meera Lake had stabilized into a steady harmonic frequency that Noah could feel in his bones. According to Sarah, this was necessary for the temporal manipulation technology to function safely, but it also made the entire area detectable to anyone with the right scanning equipment. We have maybe an hour before the enemy response teams arrive, Sarah said through the facility's communication system as they entered the airlock. The quantum signatures from tonight's activities will have alerted their monitoring stations across the region. Inside the facility, Noah noticed changes that hadn't been there during his previous visits. Additional equipment had been installed, sophisticated, devices that hummed with barely contained energy and displayed readouts that looked more like star charts than technical specifications. Sarah moved among them with familiar ease, her fingers dancing across control interfaces that she'd clearly operated many times before. "You've been here recently," Noah observed. "This isn't the first time you've accessed the facility since your supposed death." Sarah paused in her preparations. "I've been here many times over the past 10 years, maintaining the systems, updating the intelligence files, preparing for this moment when we'd finally be able to complete the mission." "What mission exactly?" Meera asked. You keep talking about enemy agents and foreign intelligence, but you haven't explained what they're actually trying to accomplish. Sarah activated the facility's main display, which filled with a complex timeline showing historical events stretching back 50 years. But many of the events were marked with notation that made Noah's skin crawl, annotations indicating which disasters, conflicts and tragedies had been artificially created or modified using temporal manipulation technology. In 1987, a research team in the Soviet Union achieved the first successful temporal communication experiment. Sarah began. They discovered how to send information backwards through quantum fields, essentially allowing them to communicate with their own past. The implications were staggering. They could warn their past selves about coming disasters, provide advanced knowledge of political developments, even influence historical events by sharing information from the future. The timeline showed dozens of events that had been altered or created through temporal intervention. Noah recognized some of them. Industrial accidents that had bankrupted American companies, terrorist attacks that had shifted public opinion, natural disasters that had occurred at suspiciously convenient times for certain political movements. The Soviet program ended with the collapse of the USSR, Sarah continued, but the research was sold to private interests. Over the past 30 years, a network of corporations, intelligence agencies, and criminal organizations has been using temporal manipulation to reshape history for their benefit. But quantum communication only allows information transfer, Noah protested. How do you create physical disasters by sending messages to the past? You don't create the disasters directly, Sarah explained. You provide the information necessary for agents in the past to create them. A chemical formula that causes industrial equipment to fail at a specific time. Stock market information that allows coordinated financial attacks, intelligence about security weaknesses that enables terrorist operations. Meera studied the timeline with growing horror. How many people have died because of these manipulations? Millions, Sarah said quietly, and the network is preparing for something much worse. They've developed technology that goes beyond communication. They can actually transport objects and even people through temporal fields. They're planning to eliminate key historical figures, prevent certain technological developments, and reshape the entire course of human civilization. Noah felt sick as the implications sank in. And quantum dynamics has been trying to stop them? Quantum dynamics was infiltrated by the network years ago, Sarah revealed. But we've been running a counter-operation, using their own resources against them. The facility you found was designed to look like a rogue research station, but it's actually been serving as a command center for our resistance efforts. Sarah's fingers flew across the quantum control interfaces, bringing up files that showed the true scope of the operation. The temporal manipulation network included government officials, corporate executives, military leaders, and scientific researchers across dozens of countries. They'd been coordinating their activities through quantum communication channels, sharing information about profitable disasters and strategic interventions. The master control key you found in my personal files isn't just access to the facility's systems, Sarah explained. It's the key to a quantum virus I've been developing, a program that can trace the network's communication pathways and permanently disable their temporal manipulation capabilities. A quantum virus. Noah had never heard the term before, but the concept was terrifying. What would something like that do? It would propagate backwards through all the quantum communication channels the network has established, corrupting their data and severing their ability to coordinate temporal manipulations. Essentially, it would trap them in the present timeline and prevent any further alterations to history. Meera pointed to a section of the timeline that showed events from their own lives. Mom, some of these alterations, they're things that happened to us. Dad losing his job, our financial problems, even your disappearance. Were those artificially created? Sarah's expression grew pained. The network identified me as a threat years before I discovered their operations. They've been systematically destroying our family's stability, hoping to force me into making mistakes they could exploit. Your father's layoff, our mounting debt, even the timing of the eviction notice. All of it was orchestrated to make you desperate enough to investigate. The facility. Noah felt a surge of anger that was almost overwhelming. You're saying they deliberately ruined our lives as part of some elaborate manipulation. They needed someone with technical skills and personal access to the facility, Sarah confirmed. Someone who would be motivated to explore its contents, but naive enough to be controlled. They've been watching you for months, waiting for you to make exactly the choices you made. But that means we walked right into their trap, Meera realized. Everything we've done tonight, every decision we've made, they've been anticipating it. Sarah shook her head. They anticipated that you'd find the facility and access the basic research files. They didn't anticipate that I'd be able to contact you through the quantum communicator, or that you'd be brave enough to resist their initial intimidation tactics. And they definitely didn't anticipate that we'd be able to activate the quantum virus. Why didn't you activate it years ago? Noah asked. Because it required a specific set of quantum field conditions that could only be created by coordinating multiple temporal manipulation platforms, Sarah explained. I needed Chen's cooperation and access to quantum dynamics mobile systems. But I also needed you and Meera here, because the virus requires genetic authentication from my family members to prevent it from being weaponized by the network. Noah studied the quantum virus program on the facility's main display. The code was unlike anything he'd seen, not just computer programming, but mathematical equations that seemed to describe the fundamental structure of space-time itself. Sarah had been working on this for 10 years, building a weapon that could permanently cripple the temporal manipulation network. What are the risks? He asked. What happens if we activate this thing and it doesn't work as intended? The worst-case scenario is temporal cascade failure, Sarah admitted. The quantum disruption could propagate beyond the network's communication channels and affect the stability of space-time itself. We could accidentally erase portions of history, create paradoxes that unravel causality, or trap ourselves in temporal loops. And the best-case scenario? We save human civilization from being controlled by a network of criminals who think history is their personal playground. Noah looked at his daughter, seeing his own fear and determination reflected in her eyes. The choice they faced was impossibly complex. Risk everything on Sarah's plan to stop the temporal manipulation network, or allow that network to continue reshaping history for their own benefit. There's something else you need to know, Sarah said, her voice growing urgent. The network has been preparing a massive temporal intervention, something they call the Great Reset. They plan to eliminate key historical figures from the past century, prevent certain technological developments, and establish a timeline where they control the major governments and corporations of the world. When? Meera asked. Tomorrow, Sarah said. They've been building up to this for decades, and they're finally ready to implement their ultimate plan. If we don't stop them tonight, there may not be another opportunity. The facility's external. Sensors detected movement on the surface. Multiple aircraft approaching Meera Lake at high speed. The enemy response teams had arrived ahead of schedule, and they were bringing equipment that could penetrate the facility's stealth capabilities. We're out of time, Sarah announced. The quantum virus program is ready for activation, but it requires simultaneous authentication from all three of us. Are you ready to make this choice? Noah looked at the quantum control interface, at his wife, who'd been fighting this battle for 10 years, and at his daughter, who deserved a future free from the manipulation of temporal criminals. The weight of human history seemed to rest on the decision they were about to make, Above them, the sound of submersible vehicles entering Meera Lake echoed through the facility's hull. The enemy agents were coming for them, and they had only minutes to activate the quantum virus before. The facility was overrun. "Let's do it," Noah said, placing his hand on the biometric scanner. "Let's save the future." The moment Noah placed his hand on the biometric scanner, the facility's quantum systems erupted into activity. Sarah and Meera added their biometric signatures to the authentication sequence, and the quantum virus program began its activation protocols. The air itself seemed to vibrate with barely contained energy as temporal fields aligned across multiple dimensions. But before the virus could complete its deployment, the facility shuddered under the impact of something massive striking its hull. Through the external sensors, Noah watched as submersible vehicles equipped with cutting tools began attacking the facility's outer defenses. The enemy response teams had arrived with equipment specifically designed to breach quantum-shielded structures. "They're using temporal disruptors," Sarah announced, her voice tight with concern. "They can collapse our quantum fields and leave us vulnerable to conventional weapons." The facility's defensive systems activated automatically, extending energy, shields, and deploying countermeasures that had been built into the structure's design. But Noah could see that the attackers had come prepared. Their equipment was specifically calibrated to overcome Sarah's defenses. "How long until the virus completes its deployment?" Meera asked, her hands steady on the quantum control interface. "Despite the chaos around them, 15 minutes, Sarah replied. "But we need to maintain the quantum field stability for the entire duration, or the program will fail." Another impact shook the facility, this one accompanied by the screech of cutting tools against advanced composite materials. The attackers were methodically breaching the outer hull, working their way toward the main compartments where the quantum manipulation equipment was housed. "They're not just trying to stop us," Noah realized. "They're trying to capture the quantum virus program intact. If they can reverse engineer it, they could use it as a weapon against anyone who opposes their operations." Sarah nodded grimly. "That's why I built a failsafe into the system. If the facility is compromised before the virus completes its deployment, the quantum drives will initiate a controlled collapse that destroys all the research data, including the evidence we need to expose their network," Meera asked. "Including everything," Sarah confirmed. "It's better to lose the evidence than to let them weaponize the technology." The cutting sounds grew louder as the attackers breached the facility's airlock systems. Noah could hear voices through the compromised hull, tactical communications, in multiple languages as the assault team coordinated their approach. "We need to buy more time," Noah said, studying the facility's defensive capabilities. "What other weapons systems do we have?" Sarah hesitated. "There's a quantum destabilizer that can create localized temporal distortions. It would disable their equipment and probably kill anyone within its range, but using it would destabilize our own quantum field alignment. How much time would it buy us? Maybe 5 minutes, but it would reduce our chances of successfully deploying the virus by 50%. Noah weighed the options. They needed 15 minutes to complete the virus deployment, but the attackers would breach the main compartment within 3 minutes. The quantum destabilizer could delay them, but only at the cost of endangering their primary mission. "There's another option," Meera said quietly. "I could activate the facility's evacuation protocols and surface while you and Mom complete the virus deployment. The attackers would follow me, thinking I was carrying the most important data." "Absolutely not," Noah and Sarah said simultaneously. "It's the only way," Meera insisted. "The evacuation pod has its own quantum shielding. I'd be protected from the temporal distortions. And once the virus is deployed, it won't matter if they capture me, because their communication networks will be permanently severed." Sarah shook her head. "The evacuation pod isn't designed to withstand the kind of weapons they're using. You'd be completely vulnerable once you reach the surface." But I'd be buying you the time you need to save the future, Meera countered. Mom, you've been fighting this battle for 10 years. Dad's been struggling to protect our family while dealing with problems these people created. Now it's my turn to contribute something meaningful. The facility shuddered again as the attackers breached another defensive barrier. They were running out of time to make a decision. Wait, Noah said, studying the quantum virus deployment progress. Sarah, what if we modified the program to deploy in segments instead of all at once? If we could get even partial deployment before the facility is compromised, it might be enough to disrupt their primary communication networks. Sarah's fingers flew across the quantum control interface as she analyzed the possibility. It's theoretically possible, but partial deployment would be much less effective. We might stop some of their operations, but the network's core command structure would remain intact. Better than losing everything if the facility is destroyed, Noah pointed out. Or, Meera said, we could do both. Partial deployment now to ensure we get something, then I create a distraction while you complete the full deployment. Before either parent could object, Meera activated the evacuation pod systems. The facility's emergency protocols engaged, preparing to launch her toward the surface while maintaining quantum field integrity around the main compartment. Meera, don't do this, Sarah pleaded. We can find another way. There isn't time for another way, Meera replied, sealing herself into the evacuation pod. I love you both. Finish what Mom started. The evacuation pod launched, carrying Meera toward the surface as the facility's quantum systems focused their remaining power on the virus deployment sequence. Through the external sensors, Noah watched his daughter's pod break the surface of Meera Lake, immediately drawing the attention of the enemy surveillance teams positioned around the shoreline. She's brave, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face as she continued working on the quantum virus. She's braver than I ever was. The attackers inside the facility had breached the main compartment's outer defenses and were now cutting through the final barrier that protected the quantum manipulation equipment. Noah could see them through the facility's internal cameras, professional soldiers equipped with advanced technology and weapons designed specifically for this mission. Partial deployment is complete, Sarah announced. We've severed about 30% of their quantum communication network, but to get the rest, we need another 8 minutes. We don't have 8 minutes, Noah replied, watching the attackers prepare to breach the final barrier. They'll be in here within 60 seconds. Sarah made a decision that Noah saw reflected in her eyes before she spoke. Then I'll give you those 8 minutes. She activated the quantum destabilizer, and reality twisted around them. The facility's quantum fields collapsed into a localized distortion that warped space-time itself, creating a zone where normal physics ceased to function. The attackers, who had been cutting through the final barrier, suddenly found themselves frozen in temporal amber. Their movements slowed to a crawl as they were caught in the edge of the distortion field. But the destabilizer was also tearing apart the facility's structure, and Noah could feel the quantum virus program beginning to destabilize as its supporting systems failed. They had minutes at most before everything collapsed. I can't maintain this for long, Sarah warned, her voice strained with the effort of controlling the temporal distortion. The quantum fields are cascading toward total collapse. Noah took over the virus deployment controls, his satellite technician, training finally finding familiar ground as he worked to stabilize the quantum field fluctuations. The mathematics were beyond his understanding, but the engineering principles were recognizable: power distribution, signal routing, system redundancy. 6 minutes to complete deployment, he announced, his hands moving across the control interfaces with growing confidence. The quantum virus is propagating through their communication networks faster than expected. Through the facility's external sensors, he could see that the partial deployment was already having effects. The enemy's surveillance teams around Meera, Lake were losing contact with their command structure, and their sophisticated equipment was beginning to malfunction as the virus corrupted their quantum communication pathways. But on the surface, Meera was in immediate danger. The enemy agents who had been coordinating through quantum channels were now operating independently, and some of them were closing in on her evacuation pod with weapons drawn. "Sarah, can you extend the distortion field to protect Meera?" "Not without losing control of the virus deployment," she replied. "The quantum systems can't handle both operations simultaneously." Noah faced an impossible choice: complete the mission that could save human civilization or protect his daughter from immediate danger. But as he watched the quantum virus continue, its propagation through the enemy network, he realized there might be a third option. "What if we weaponize the virus?" he asked. "Instead of just severing their communications, what if we turn their own quantum systems against them?" Sarah's eyes widened as she understood what he was suggesting. A feedback loop through their communication networks. It would overload any quantum-based equipment they're using, including their weapons and surveillance systems. "Can you do it?" "It would require redirecting all the facility's power into the virus program," Sarah warned. "We'd lose life support, structural integrity, everything. The facility would be destroyed in the process." "But it would work?" "It would work." Noah looked at his wife, seeing the same determination in her eyes that had drawn him to her 20 years ago. She'd spent 10 years preparing for this moment, building weapons and gathering intelligence to stop the temporal manipulation network. Now they had the chance to end the threat permanently, but only at the cost of their own lives. "Do it," he said. "Save our daughter and save the future." Sarah initiated the feedback protocol, and the facility's quantum systems began channeling every available unit of power into the virus program. The temporal distortion field collapsed as the destabilizer shut down, but the virus had evolved into something far more dangerous. A quantum weapon that propagated through the enemy's own networks, turning their technology against them. Around Meera Lake, the enemy surveillance systems exploded in cascades of sparks and twisted metal. The agents closing in on Meera's evacuation pod found their weapons failing, their communications severed, their quantum-enhanced equipment reduced to useless scrap. But the facility was tearing itself apart as the quantum feedback effects overwhelmed its structural systems. Noah and Sarah had perhaps 30 seconds before the entire structure collapsed, taking them with it. In those final moments, Noah reached for his wife's hand, finding the same comfort in her touch that had sustained him. Through 20 years of marriage and 10 years of mourning, they'd saved their daughter and struck a decisive blow against the temporal manipulation network, but they'd paid the ultimate price for victory. As the facility's quantum systems reached critical overload, something unexpected happened. Instead of the catastrophic collapse Noah had anticipated, the quantum fields began stabilizing in a configuration he didn't recognize from any of the technical documentation. "Sarah, what's happening?" he asked, watching the facility's displays show energy patterns that seemed to defy the laws of physics. "I'm not sure," she replied, her voice filled with wonder rather than fear. "The quantum virus isn't just propagating through their networks. It's learning, adapting, becoming something more sophisticated than I programmed it to be." Through the external sensors, they could see the effects rippling outward from Meera Lake. The enemy agent's equipment wasn't just failing, it was being actively reprogrammed by the virus, turning their own quantum technology into a weapon against the temporal manipulation network's infrastructure worldwide. But more importantly, the quantum field stabilization was creating something Noah hadn't thought possible, a temporal anchor point that was preventing the facility from collapsing while simultaneously protecting everyone within its influence from the destructive feedback. "Effects, the stabilization core," Sarah breathed, understanding dawning in her voice. "The facility's core systems aren't just running the virus. They're using it to rewrite the quantum field equations in real time. We've created a stable temporal bubble that exists outside normal space-time. Noah studied the readings, his technical training helping him grasp the implications, even if he couldn't understand the underlying physics. Are you saying we're not going to die? I'm saying we might have accidentally discovered how to exist in multiple timelines simultaneously, Sarah replied. The virus has created a quantum state where the facility exists in the timeline where it's destroyed and the timeline where it survives, allowing us to influence both realities. The implications were staggering. Not only had they prevented their own deaths, but they'd gained the ability to monitor and potentially modify the effects of the quantum virus as it propagated through the enemy network systems. On the surface, Meera's evacuation pod had been recovered by Chen's quantum dynamics team, who had apparently been monitoring the situation from a safe distance. Through the facility's communication systems, Noah could hear his daughter's voice as she coordinated with Chen to assess the damage to the enemy surveillance network. "Dad? Mom? Are you receiving this?" Meera's voice came through clearly, despite the quantum field distortion surrounding the facility. "We're here, sweetheart," Noah responded. "We're safe, and the mission was successful beyond what we'd hoped for. The quantum virus has propagated through 97% of the temporal manipulation network," Chen's voice added. "We're receiving confirmation from monitoring stations worldwide that their quantum communication systems are going offline in cascade failures. But the most remarkable discovery came when Sarah accessed the virus's evolved programming. The quantum weapon had not only severed the enemy network's communications, but had also begun reversing some of the temporal manipulations they'd implemented over the past 3 decades. "Look at this," Sarah said, bringing up a display that showed historical events reverting to their original configurations. The virus is undoing their artificial disasters, restoring the timeline to its natural state. Noah watched in amazement as the display showed industrial accidents being prevented, terrorist attacks being stopped before they occurred, and natural disasters returning to their original timelines. The quantum virus was essentially performing surgery on history itself, removing the cancer of artificial manipulation while preserving the healthy tissue of natural causality. It's learning the difference between natural historical events and artificially created ones, Sarah explained. The virus is sophisticated enough to distinguish between legitimate cause and effect relationships and manipulated interventions. Over the next hour, they watched as the effects rippled through history. Companies that had been artificially bankrupted were restored to prosperity. Political leaders who had been eliminated by temporal manipulation were returned to their proper timelines. Wars that had been extended or created through temporal intervention were prevented or shortened, and in their personal lives, the changes were equally dramatic. Noah's job at the satellite facility was restored, as the artificial circumstances that had led to his layoff were undone. The financial problems that had brought them to the edge of homelessness vanished, as the temporal manipulations that had created them were reversed. "It's not just fixing the big problems," Meera observed as she reviewed the data feeds. "It's fixing everything they did to us, all the small manipulations they used to control our lives and force Dad to find the facility." Sarah nodded. "The virus has access to the complete database of their operations. It can identify and reverse every artificial intervention they've made, restoring the timeline to its natural state. But the most personal restoration came when the quantum fields around the facility achieved complete stabilization. The temporal anchor that had prevented their deaths also allowed Sarah to exist fully in the present timeline, no longer displaced in quantum fields, but physically present and alive. The quantum loop that's kept me suspended for 10 years is finally collapsing," she explained, as the facility's systems completed their transformation. "But instead of trapping me or destroying me, it's integrating my quantum state with normal space-time." Noah felt tears streaming down his face as he realized what this meant. Not only had they saved the world from the temporal manipulation network, but they'd also been reunited as a family. The sacrifice they'd been prepared to make had instead resulted in the restoration of everything they'd lost. The facility's systems completed their quantum field stabilization and began surfacing, bringing Noah and Sarah back to Meera Lake, where Meera and Chen's team were waiting. As they emerged from the water, Noah saw that the lake itself had been transformed. The quantum effects had somehow purified the water and restored the natural ecosystem to a pristine state that hadn't existed since before the first temporal manipulations began. The virus has established permanent monitoring protocols, Chen reported as they regrouped on the shoreline. Any attempt to develop new temporal manipulation technology will trigger automatic countermeasures that prevent its deployment. What about the research data? Noah asked. The patents and quantum technology that Sarah developed. It's all still intact, Sarah replied, but with safeguards built in to prevent weaponization. The technology can be used for beneficial purposes, medical research, disaster prediction, scientific advancement, but the virus will prevent any applications that could be used to manipulate history or harm people. As they prepared to leave Meera Lake, Noah realized that their journey had come full circle. He'd come to the lake as a desperate father looking for salvage to pay his bills. He was leaving as the guardian of the most advanced technology ever developed, with his family restored and the future secured. The quantum virus continued its work around the world, dismantling the temporal manipulation network and restoring the natural timeline. But it did so with the wisdom to preserve beneficial changes and the restraint to avoid creating new problems while solving old ones. What happens now? Meera asked as they loaded their equipment into Chen's vehicles. Now we go home, Sarah said, putting her arms around her husband and daughter. We go home and build the life we should have had all along. Noah looked back at Meera Lake one final time, seeing it not as the place where he'd lost his wife 10 years ago, but as the place where their family had been reborn. The water was calm and clear, reflecting the morning sun like a mirror that showed not just the present, but the promise of a better future. 6 months later, Noah stood in the kitchen of their new home, watching Sarah help Meera with her college application essays. The house was larger than their old apartment, with picture windows that looked out over a garden Sarah had planted in the spring. But the most important difference wasn't the space or the view. It was the absence of worry that had haunted there. Grimly, for so many years, the quantum virus had done more than just restore their financial stability. It had undone the artificial manipulations that had shaped their lives, allowing them to build a future based on their own choices rather than external forces. Noah had returned to his work as a satellite technician, but now he was consulted by government agencies and private corporations who needed expertise in quantum communication systems. The patents contained in Sarah's research files had been licensed to companies around the world, generating income that ensured Meera would never face the financial pressures that had defined Noah's recent years. But more importantly, the technology was being used for beneficial purposes, medical research that could predict genetic disorders before they manifested, environmental monitoring systems that could prevent natural disasters, and communication networks that operated beyond the reach of any government or corporation. "Dad, look at this," Meera said, holding up her laptop to show him a news article. Another temporal manipulation cell was discovered in Eastern Europe. The virus tracked down their communication networks and exposed their entire operation. Noah read the article with satisfaction. The quantum virus continued to function as Sarah had designed it, monitoring global communication networks for signs of temporal manipulation technology and automatically neutralizing any attempts to recreate the infrastructure that had once threatened human civilization. 37 cells dismantled in 6 months, Sarah observed, looking up from her review of Meera's essay, and each exposure leads to more investigations that uncover additional corruption and criminal activity. The most satisfying aspect of their victory was watching the larger implications unfold. The temporal manipulation network had been more extensive than any of them had realized, involving government officials, corporate executives, and criminal organizations across dozens of countries. As the virus exposed their operations, law enforcement agencies around the world were able to prosecute corruption cases that would have remained hidden forever. Dr. Marcus Chen had been particularly helpful in coordinating the global response to the network's exposure. Quantum Dynamics had been restructured as a research organization focused on beneficial applications of temporal technology, with oversight committees that included ethicists, scientists, and representatives from international humanitarian organizations. "I still can't believe Mom's been alive all this time," Meera said, a sentiment she'd expressed regularly over the past 6 months. 10 years of thinking she was dead, and she was fighting to protect us the entire time. Sarah smiled, but Noah could see the sadness that still lingered in her eyes. The decade of separation hadn't been easy for any of them, and rebuilding their family relationships required patience and understanding from everyone involved. "I missed so much of your childhood," Sarah said to Meera. "Your first day of high school, learning to drive, all the small moments that make up a life. I can't get those years back, but I'm grateful for the time we have ahead of us." Meera reached across the table to squeeze her mother's hand. "You were protecting the entire world from people who wanted to control history itself. I think that's a pretty good reason to miss a few school plays." Noah watched his wife and daughter with a contentment he hadn't felt since the early years of his marriage. The financial stress was gone, replaced by security and opportunity. The uncertainty about Sarah's fate had been resolved, replaced by the miracle of her return. And the guilt he'd carried about his inability to provide for his family had been transformed into pride in what they'd accomplished together. But perhaps the most important change was the restoration of hope. For years, Noah had felt like he was fighting a losing battle against circumstances beyond his control. Now he understood that many of those circumstances had been artificially created by people who saw his family as pawns in a larger game. Defeating the temporal manipulation network hadn't just saved the world. It had saved his sense of agency and purpose. "I've been thinking about the facility," Noah said, interrupting his wife and daughter's conversation about college plans. "What should we do with it now that the immediate crisis is over?" Sarah had been considering the same question. "The quantum systems are too advanced to simply abandon, but they're also too dangerous to leave unguarded. I've been discussing the possibility of converting it into a research station for beneficial temporal studies." "Like what?" Meera asked. "Medical applications primarily. If we can use quantum fields to communicate with past timeline states, we might be able to develop treatments for genetic disorders by understanding how they develop over time. Or environmental restoration, understanding how ecosystems functioned before human intervention and using that knowledge to repair current damage." Noah nodded approvingly. It seemed fitting that technology originally developed for warfare and manipulation would be converted to healing and restoration. "What about security? How do we ensure that no one else attempts to weaponize the research?" "The virus has evolved beyond its original programming," Sarah explained. "It's become a kind of digital immune system for human civilization, monitoring all quantum communication networks for signs of temporal manipulation technology. Any attempt to recreate the infrastructure we destroyed would be automatically detected and neutralized." They spent the evening discussing plans for the future, Meera's college education, Sarah's research proposals, and Noah's expanding role as a consultant for quantum communication systems. It was the kind of conversation they'd never been able to have during the years of financial crisis, when every discussion was colored by immediate survival needs. As they prepared for bed, Noah stood at the bedroom window, looking out at the stars. He'd spent his career studying through satellite systems. The same stars had shone on them during their worst moments of desperation and their greatest triumph. But now they seemed brighter, more welcoming, as if the restoration of the natural timeline had somehow clarified the view. "Do you ever regret how we handled the situation?" Sarah asked, joining him at the window. "All the risks we took, the danger we put Meera in?" Noah considered the question carefully. "I regret that the situation existed in the first place. I regret that you had to sacrifice 10 years of our lives together to fight people who saw history as their personal property. But I don't regret our choices once we understood what we were facing." Sarah slipped her hand into his, a gesture that still carried the wonder of her return from what they'd believed was death. Meera was braver than either of us. When she activated that evacuation pod, knowing it would draw their attention away from the facility, she made the kind of choice that heroes make in stories. "She learned that from her mother," Noah replied. "You taught her that some things are worth risking everything to protect." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the night sky and thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment of peace. The eviction notice that had seemed like the end of the world 6 months ago was now just a memory, replaced by security and opportunity that they'd earned through courage and sacrifice. "The future doesn't have to repeat the past," Noah said, remembering the inscription Sarah had written on the back of her ID badge. "No," Sarah agreed, "it doesn't, and now we get to help write what comes next." In the morning they would continue their work, Sarah advancing her research into beneficial applications of quantum technology, Noah consulting on communication, systems that would help humanity explore the stars, and Meera preparing for a college education that would prepare her to contribute to the better world they'd helped create. But tonight, they were simply a family reunited after years of separation and struggle, looking forward to a future they'd earned the right to shape. The floating bunker that had started as Noah's desperate search for salvage had become the foundation for the most important discovery in human history. More importantly, it had brought them together and given them the power to ensure that history belonged to humanity as a whole, not to the few who would manipulate it for personal gain. As they finally turned away from the window and headed to bed, Noah felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond personal victory. They'd saved more than their own family. They'd saved the integrity of human civilization itself. And in doing so, they'd discovered that sometimes the most desperate circumstances can lead to the most extraordinary discoveries. The stars continued their ancient dance across the sky, unchanged by human ambition, but witnessed by a family that had learned the true value of time, not as a weapon to be wielded, but as a gift to be treasured.